Hey, welcome to Knock the Door, a podcast about squatting in free spaces. Come in and join our conversation.
Squat time!
D.H.Z Werkplaats. Welcome. I'm very happy to have you here. We met for the first time a while ago, so I remember we had a very nice conversation about what you do, about your space, about what it is to have a semi-squat free space in Rotterdam. And we're here to talk about it today. We're going to speak about what squatting means to you, what a free space is for you guys, what could it be, what could it achieve, and potentially debunk a few assumptions that are out there about what it is. But first, I would like you to introduce yourselves, because I can't do it better than you would. Who wants to start?
Should I just say I'm Tommy? I've been involved with the D.H.Z Werkplaats since I moved here, 2017, the end of 2017. And my involvement has grown quite steadily since then, especially when we relocated to the place where we are now in 2020. Maybe I leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm Linda, and I volunteer at the garden over at D.H.Z. And my relationship with that is really through Tommy, whom I met last year in Utrecht during a show that I was building out. And we connected, and that was also a symbol for me to make some changes in my life. And so I went back to the States afterwards and took a year to move out here. And I knew that being a part of the D.H.Z collective would also ground me through the transition of migration.
Okay, sounds interesting. We started discussing a bit about it before the recording, actually, before we started. How do you relate to squatting? Also, given the fact that you used to live in the States and now you discover it here in the Netherlands? It's actually a question to both of you, but yeah, how do you relate to it? What does it mean to you?
I have some personal experience with it in the States. Squatting in Manhattan during COVID, and then also far Northern California in my early 20s in a rural area. Both experiences taught me a lot in terms of like how to interact, not just in architectural spaces, but specifically in underground scenes that may or may not necessarily want to be known.
Okay.
So,
do you see any difference with how things are handled here in the Netherlands?
Definitely. I'm still trying to figure it out. And so this experience is showing me how to connect with people through storytelling. I think that squatting is very much a state of mind, and I've lived many different experiences, but still I think the connecting thread through it is the love of music. And music is, it's a technology that helps to liberate, and I think embodying the values specifically through squatting means a lot for underserved communities, where it is the only thing that you can kind of take back and communicate thoughts, emotions, messages.
I agree. Earlier I was checking an interview from an artist I like a lot, a French artist who plays electronic music mainly. And during the interview, he was like, nobody cares about the kind of music you do, but making music in itself isn't a political act. So just make music and put it out there. So I think it really connects to what you said. It was very simple, but it blew my mind a bit because I make a bit of music myself, and I'm also a DJ, and I'm always like, I just do what I do, and but nice, I think. Yeah. How about you, Tommy?
It's funny that I think a lot of the people that are in our collective joined from like similar kind of looking for a new community or space when they've moved to the city, which is also how I ended up at the Do-It-Self Werkplaats. Because I was also a part of kind of bike messenger scene in the US, and that had quite a kind of strong community that overlapped with squatting sometimes, and people were kind of looking out for each other, and bikes were a form of identity making or resistance in some ways. So that was also then the first thing I was looking for here. And then I found this group. And I think almost everyone in the group kind of has similar, like, this is their grounding place. I'm also from the US. I didn't say that. Yeah, so it's also actually been the place where I've met a lot of my closest relationships here in Rotterdam.
D.H.Z, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
At the D.H.Z, yeah.
Speaking about the space itself, I understood that it was like it has evolved a lot since it got started. I believe you explained to me that it used to be sort of a more traditional squatting space before it became something else. Can you maybe walk us through how it evolved precisely?
Like going back to its full history, let's say.
Yeah, you can also speed it up if you want, or make or just pick up the main events to your liking, I guess.
Yeah, sure. I'll give the sort of overview for people that maybe aren't familiar with it. So it's had multiple generations of initiators and reinitiators and people that were involved in maintaining it, managing it, running it, volunteers, however you would call it. It started in 2009 with a squatter duo and a few other associated people, I think. And they squatted an empty retail space in what was then called Krooswijk, which is now called Kralingen, which is also a sort of history of gentrification of that area, that the name changes. Because if people that are familiar with Rotterdam, Krooswijk and Kralingen are very different identities of class. And they squatted that more because they were opposed to empty spaces that should be put to use for common public good. And then that turned out to be the most useful need in the community was a bike repair workshop. And then they were there for a few years, and they had different struggles against the housing corporation there, and working with the municipality to try to get them a new space. And there was they were on the news, and they had a lot of big petitions from that were started by the neighborhood that wanted them to remain there. And there was hundreds of people from the neighborhood that were petitioning on their behalf to the municipality to keep the space, which is a sign of really its quite initial success. And for that full history, you'd have to talk to the initiators because they would know all that. But from what I've seen, I still meet a lot of people from those times that come back to where we are now and are still enthusiastic about that it's still existing, and they want to even continue to support us. So I feel like there was a lot of momentum that was built up in those first years that still carries through, and that it had such a great impact within that neighborhood. And we're kind of still in the Rotterdam North area. And then they failed to get that space from the municipality or from the housing corporation. And then they moved to another long-term squat that was also in Rotterdam North. And that squat had existed since the late 90s, more or less. And then they were there in the 2014 to until 2020, more or less. And that was practically almost a whole street that was squatted with different things, mostly housing, and then that burned in 2020, and then like a few weeks before everything started locking down for COVID-19. So then we had a struggle with the municipality to have them allow us to go inside to get our tools. Because, I mean, our workshop did not burn, but the upstairs burned quite badly. Everyone turned out to be okay. And then we finally did manage to get all of our stuff. And then we were kind of lucky enough to get into the place that we are now, which is essentially a shipping container in the side of a park that we have since slowly expanded by building a sort of greenhouse next to it, which works to extend our dry and relatively warmer workshop space, which we are in the process of developing further. And it's on a parcel of land, more or less, that's kind of also sort of squatted from the municipality by another group before us. And part of that has a garden, and then there's our shipping container and the greenhouse. So it's a workshop and a garden at the
Okay.
moment. Yeah.
I always
Sorry for this long overview.
no, it's important, I guess. I always wonder how this container ended up there, actually, but maybe you don't know.
I know the general story. You would have to also then talk to those people for the specifics, the non-mythological history. But what I've been told, so this parcel of the park, so it's really like the strip on the side of a park, city park. And so this park was being renovated in around 2013, 14, something like that. And there's this collective called Stad in de Maak, and they're kind of former squatters, artists, architects.
They're also in Nord, right?
That's where they started historically. Like they started around 2000, during the housing crisis, post 2011. Now they're scattered around, and they have they were doing like these larger projects in Vlaardingen and the south of Rotterdam and other places now. But they started with this idea of kind of creating the urban commons through a network of empty buildings put to common use on the ground floor and collective housing above, which has become more difficult now that the housing market doesn't have empty buildings.
Mm-hmm.
So their model has kind of changed, or they've gone more to the outskirts, and they're kind of now collaborating with a municipality to manage buildings that have like hundreds of empty rooms, and they're trying to collectively buy housing still. So they're doing many things, but I don't want to speak for that.
them,
'Cause
yeah.
I'm not, but so they negotiated when this park was being renovated with the municipality, can you section off a piece of this land for community gardening? And then the municipality said, okay, sure, we make this little fence, and behind it you can do your thing. And then they kind of forgot about it, and no one pays attention to what's happening there. No one checks in on like how it's being organized. But the sort of structure of that makes it clear that it's something aside from the park. And apparently someone's job it was to throw out a container from the harbor. Instead of throwing it out, they just dropped it here, which was also without permission, and no one said anything. And then they built a fence without asking permission, and no one said anything. And if things look kind of proper, then no one questions it. That's kind of the idea.
So it's actually a set of loopholes that were exploited somehow that make it the way it is today, if I understand.
Yes, and kind of extending agreements and kind of maybe understanding what allows those agreements to not be questioned.
Mm-hmm.
Not giving people reason to question, is this allowed to be here or not?
Okay, interesting. We were speaking about music before, and you were explaining or sharing your thoughts about music. I actually asked you to send me some music beforehand. The first one was a track that you relate to squatting somehow. You will let me know who sent it or suggested it first. But we'll listen to it and discuss about it right after. So this was Rondos. I don't know how to pronounce it.
I think they call it the Rondos.
The Rondos. A black and white statement. From our conversation, I understand that you suggested the song. But when I saw because I asked to different guests also the same thing, and most of the music I received was mostly punk music. And I wanted to ask you actually, given what you said about music earlier on, why do you think that when it comes to free collectives or more underground spaces, that punk music is mostly associated with these things? Because as far as I'm concerned, I listen to a lot of hip hop, for instance, nowadays. And that's what provides me with, let's say, political music these days. But I always forget that punk is also obviously a huge chunk of political, how do you say, like contestatory music? I don't know if it's even a word. Maybe I'm making it up from French. But yeah, why do you think is this?
Why do I think that?
Or why is it a privileged style of music from free spaces, for instance? If it is,
it's so dependent on how you were raised, the kind of privileges that you have. When I came up as a teen, I was listening to a lot of hip hop music, and I was part of the dance scene in downtown San Francisco, specifically in the Mission area as well. And it was also where I met a ton of like bike messengers who were 10 plus years older than me at that time, who were also part of the graffiti and punk scene there. I rolled around more with like the dance crew. So there were different strategies in terms of like how we moved through space, but there was always a connection with the punk messengers because during the recession that hit, me and my friends actually organized ourselves to make a restaurant, the pop-up restaurant happen in the Mission. And these bike messengers were also our friends. They also DJ'd, also wrote poetry, read a lot of books. And so publishing became the lifeline of support that actually helped me to integrate text, images into a form. And that's actually what brought me out to New York and many different spaces, was through the printed matter, and community building through that as well. So it's been doing it for 20 plus years, and I really believe that like a lot of those intricate ritual movements that happened as a teen has brought me here to Rotterdam, where I still continue to meet people who not only live their values, but also embody that through either urban gardening, bike repair, or working in shelters, doing social care, all of that, and as well as working in academia. I find that people my generation who came up in the underground scene work in facilitating these happenings that can occur in academia or public spaces like D.H.Z. A part of, I feel, a lineage of thinkers and philosophers who also think about not just human rights, but animal rights as well. So being vegan, for example, is a part of that philosophy that I live by. And it's nice to encounter others who feel the same way, but even more important is to coexist with others who, live a different way. So.
Do you organize concerts sometimes at D.H.Z, actually?
We have organized one a couple of years ago. We did like a Harvest Fest, and some friends, performed for us. And it wasn't punk music, believe it or not, but kind of rockish, And then we had some DJs. I find the punk is a little bit less here than in the U.S., but it's still prevalent in the squat scene, I'd say. People seem to be more into like hard techno, which I don't understand, but that's kind of more. I mean, there's also like, if you go back to Rotterdam squat history, if you're going to like 90s and 2000s, it's really like the gabber techno. I mean, it's like these, which is still happening. I mean, there's like these. That's a whole subgenre of the squat scene, is like the ravers, and they're making these huge last minute parties underneath highways and in the fields, like who knows where. I don't know much about that, but and we did when we first moved in. There was someone from the neighborhood approached us and wanted to kind of do a traditional Turkish folk song concert at D.H.Z, and that was actually the most successful one.
Nice. Good to hear. Speaking of the neighborhood, how is your relationship with it these days? Is there, how can I say, are you welcome there, or have you established some sort of trust with them now? How do people see what you're doing there? What is the vibe?
That's a good question. I've experienced back in the States with coalition building. And so I was quite surprised by some, I think, cultural things when I first arrived here. It was hard, but I did learn a lot about how to navigate these spaces that are really on the edge of like gentrification. You know, I understand coming from the States as a working class immigrant, but also visibly queer and androgynous can make people uncomfortable. So some of the kids had a lot of questions to ask, and I was just very direct. And they seemed to accept it. And there were some things that happened that really took me out, but it was through talking with people and engaging with the children and asking, probing about certain things that happened where we began to form, I think, a bigger dialogue on what it means to not just garden, but to have the selection of the seeds be reflective of the community, so multi-generational, multicultural as well. And it's a continuous buildup of relationships. It takes time, when you come into a Black and brown neighborhood, which is the kind of neighborhood I grew up in the States. And so I see many different patterns where I'm still trying to figure it out. I think there's a language barrier for sure, but one thing that I do plan on doing this year is to learn how to speak and communicate in Dutch as well as Arabic, so that the coalition building can happen, and also be a listener, more of a listener.
Sounds nice. How about you, Tommy?
Yeah, it is. It is quite complex, but also, important or urgent. I mean, so then as one thing, I think that there is a continuity in the presence of the do-it-self Werkplaats in the general area of the north of Rotterdam, because it's been there for so long. So there are people that are coming to the workshop that have come there for over 10 years, which is quite cool and interesting.
Incredible, yeah.
Yeah. And seeing how the space in the community has transformed over those years is also quite interesting, that the support kind of stays there, but throughout its different iterations. And it wouldn't exist without that kind of broad-based community support. And broad-based community support also meaning like the people that are wanting to kind of pick up where other people left off. I mean, there's a lot to say about the demographics of who's involved and who visits. I mean, demographics are quite a complex thing, of course. But I mean, it's something even just to be said that like the people that started it are not involved for 8 years now, and there's so many people that have been involved that are like, there's no formalized organization, there's no like ownership, and yet it has continued with the exact same tools and the exact same like infrastructure for 15 years. I think that speaks to a certain type of community involvement or engagement. Just as one thing, I think that's already kind of like impressive.
How does it work, by the way, to work with a solely volunteer-based community? Because when we met the first time, I remember we had this conversation of what are the pros and cons, so to speak, to have a solely volunteer-based community over precisely the sustainability of the community itself, like the crew of volunteers. How does it work for you guys? What do you take from it?
I remember when I came in, I guess there had been a break in between gardeners, and it was a great time for me to actually in transition and working through immigration. It's a great grounding place, and there was an event that another volunteer, Gabrielle, held, which was a clothing swap to fundraise for Palestine, and it was actually through helping to assist that I met Denise, and Denise was actually the first volunteer that had something to say about the reasons why, and I connected with those. And then there was another festival that we partook in, the D.H.Z, which was last year, the neighborhood event that brought together everybody from the neighborhood and also like other collectives. And it was the first time, I think, where I really got to see how we all kind of intersect with each other, because the gardening, I feel like, can be quite isolating. You know, you work by yourself, or like with one other person, and you toil, but it also gives you an opportunity to observe the public. I consider it to be frontline gardening, because not just from the experiences and history and ethos, but that it's a gathering opportunity for people like me who are interested in knowledge sharing to hold workshops with the children there, and for them to teach me as well. I'm very open to the history of the people and where they may go, because gentrification is something that is very much talked about in the beautification of gardening. I was telling you earlier that I use the word grower to describe what I do, because growing food is very much a part of the philosophy of justice. And I plan on sticking around to make that happen, because it's a commitment to grow food. And so last year I was traveling a lot and going through, a whole different culture and country. But this year I feel very much ready with the support of the volunteers at D.H.Z. And we'll be making that happen and connecting more with the children. It's a privilege for me to observe them grow. They're like little sponges, and me as well.
Sounds beautiful. I would like to see it happen, actually.
Yeah, come through.
Yeah, I will, for sure.
See, that's how it works. Now you're involved. Uh-oh.
Yeah, It's recorded. It's taped. Going back to that question, I think it also then connects to like how it relates to community or neighborhood, which is okay. So there's actually two people from our group that were doing like embedded research over the past year or two for their master's or PhD thesis, respectively, on how collective structures are working. And one was particularly referencing how the do-it-self Werkplaats is a very different structure from some of the more formalized attempts at creating bike kitchens that are sometimes institutionally connected to a university or something like this. And even though we have no resources, we have like so much more active participation than these other places where people are getting paid, which is actually quite interesting. Like, okay, I don't know. It's a million things to break down, but like that people are there because they want to be there, and that you're helping each other out of generosity, and this is producing an economy, not just. So then it's not this transactional based thing where I help you because, you give me something, I give you something, but like I want to give you something, so now I want to like return the favor. And then of course it's just fun, you want to be there, and it's a social space, and like it's giving you energy instead of taking away energy. And this is just feeding into like communal life, I mean, for me, that's the kind of thing that I see this space as a model for producing. Like, how do we make our lives together? And what is that giving us, like what are we living for? Whether it's applied to so for me, it's not even so much about bikes. Bikes just happens to be the thing that works because we need a bike, but it's also working for gardening or sewing or building the space, because we built that space together, and that's also a form of like, bringing us together to do that, because there's the joy and the excitement of like, wow, this is like giving us quite a lot of power. Like, if we can do this together, like we can do a lot, it's just making me feel excited and that I know that I can do things with other people. Like that feels quite revolutionary to me. And I think that also then extends the sort of concept of community, of who is a volunteer and who is a visitor, can become quite blurred. People are helping each other out because you're like, oh, okay, none of y'all are here because you're working here. Y'all are here because you want to be here. So I'm going to pick up on this vibe, and I'm going to like carry it forward, because like, also because like, oh wait, this space is just held together by y'all. That's how I entered. I entered and I was like, this is the most organized squat I've ever seen. Like, this has to continue to exist. Like,
let me help y'all out. Because
Yeah,
y'all
when
are just a random group of people. Like, can I join your random group of people?
That's how I felt as well when I met you, and I liked your vibe already, and then coming through during the summer and meeting everybody else, it was like reminded me of like so much of like my youth, which I feel like we're all kind of striving for as we age and evolve as human beings, is like how to reconnect with the origins, you know, of those values, where like mutual aid is like, it's something that I feel has a lot of like value in it, in that like when someone is like going through, you know, housing crisis, like I would like to at least embolden myself with knowledge so that I can help to, if not financially, to get logistical help either through the city or through other means. So yeah.
I have a suggestion for you. We're running a bit out of time, but we could either listen to Crass, Bloody Revolutions, or Alvilda, Angoisse, which I felt was super nice because I'm from France. I was like, oh, it's French punk, and it's super recent, super nice. Which one would you like to listen to now?
French punk, since you're hosting.
French punk? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's listen to it and we'll discuss it afterwards. So, this was Angoisse by Alvilda, and none of you suggested this song, so we'll never know why it's there. But overall, you had a very nice playlist, guys. So I think I will just drop it in the comments of the video online or something. I will make something. This is the last part of the podcast, and I would like it to be oriented towards hope. And we have somebody joining. Is it not? Yes. So my question was like, given that we just spoke about what it is to be a volunteer and what could be, I forgot how to phrase my question, but basically, do you think that free spaces and squats could be a way to reintroduce free social services, let's say, to people, to cities? And how is it represented at D.H.Z, in your opinion? And we were discussing off the mic something really nice. So would you like to share?
Yeah. There's certain words that I see crop up in my mind's eye when I think of like the coalition building between the grow area as well as like the bike shop, in that we both see repair as a means to mend not just social relationships, but to blur the lines between class. I think class is one of the great issues and topics of our contemporary lived experiences. And it's also like the heartbeat of a neighborhood, in that, at least when I was growing up, like community centers were like the place where everybody would commune and exchange knowledge. And through that, just simply by putting your body out in the front line of communication, that you would be able to not just glean from other cultures, but to really move through the world and inspire you to travel and to learn more about how others like make decisions, how others collectively organize, but also individually as well. Because I think that if you cannot take care of yourself first, you can't offer that same to others. So community service is directly connected to that, you know, in that not only repair happens, but there's also empowerment in helping each other. So for me, publishing is one of those aspects of like bringing everybody together and using printing in very economical means, in multiples, to spread the experiences, just like how the books here are. They're cultural artifacts that have great importance and value to especially the youth. And I believe personally in my own practice that I make art for the youth. They're the change makers.
I agree. How about you, Tommy?
So I would say two things about it that is important to me. That one, it's like collective ownership is different than free space as a sort of service. This is very important difference for me. And also what can sustain a space to remain quote unquote free or something. So I think there's like two models that I see happening now in Netherlands or Rotterdam or elsewhere perhaps, is that things that are like squats, like squats. Now because the real estate market is so fast, you squat an empty building, most of the time you're going to be kicked out in 3 months, unless you're lucky, and then maybe you have 2 years, or you're on the outskirts of the city. Or otherwise you're trying to go through different funding bodies to then get subsidy to pay a rent for a space. But then now you have to add in becoming a stichting, becoming a bureaucracy, filling out reports, having a sort of business plan and financial model that is going to then sustain that, and then it's going to become organizational. And then you're not going to have the type of generosity value thing that we have. So we're not paying rent, and that's what makes our space possible. And we don't have to move every 3 months. That also makes it possible. Without those two things, we can't exist as we are. Then we can be like, okay, we can be chill. Like, you want to join? Like, let's hang out. Let's figure out something. You have a new idea? Let's do it. Because our risk reward ratio is super low. Like if it doesn't work, it's fine because we don't have to pay any bills. I think our space is quite unique in that, and to be in the center of the city and have that condition is super like valuable. And I think that's because we squatted land and built something illegally instead of squatting an empty building. There's no real estate value in the piece of dirt that we are on. You'd have to change the bestemming plan, the zoning plan, and then maybe build something. I mean, that's not very likely. And as long as people think that we are not dangerous or they trust us, which of course goes into different privilege of appearances, then they don't have a reason to tell us to leave, especially if we're doing their job for them as a sort of free service, giving a resource to underfunded communities and neighborhoods. And then the second thing about collective ownership, I think, is that then we have collective ownership in a way because no one actually owns it. It's just like a shed that like, yeah.
If you would go...
We cannot go to the courts and say, hey, that's our land and someone broke our lock. Like, we can't do that.
Yeah. And also if everybody would go away, then it's
nothing
just,
happens.
Yeah.
It just sits there empty.
Back to the neighborhood, kind of.
Yes. But of course, collective ownership is something that needs to be practiced and continually reintegrated. That like you invite to say that, okay, who has access to this? Who's using it? Who feels welcome? How do we perform collective management and decision making? But there is an element to it that is like, I think is working on the sense that people that know the space know that they can walk in and use the tools. You know, there's no surveillance, there's no accounting system. So in that sense, you know, and everything is like it's all donated and it's all free to take. So I think you see that kind of playing out, that people, there is a sort of sense of communal entitlement that like, yeah, that's the place where I can go get my new tire. Like I'm just going to walk in and get it.
And then I'll go to the garden and grab some herbs because there's no door. It's just an entryway that you can enter. So I like that aspect of being able to go somewhere that's free, get to know people, and then also harvest. Harvest, I feel like, is just like repair in that you leave a place better than what it was before.
Do you think like precisely the neighborhood also feels the same way about the space? Like it's also theirs and they own part of the space, whatever it means, because with our conversation we kind of highlighted the fact that it's not really owned by anybody, but this feeling of belonging maybe is a better word. Like it belongs to me, or I belong to this place. Do you think like you kind of share this value with people from the neighborhood?
Yeah, one of the observances that I had while I'll be gardening outside is how the elders would come through and just sit on the side of the gate because it's a place of relaxation but also contemplation. Whereas like the bike repair is action-oriented but also learning-based in that you want to learn how to fix bikes but also take the time because there's a learning curve, I feel, and I'm also getting into that right now, learning about the body parts of a bike that relates to garden architecture, for example.
All right.
And that extends to how the community responds back to that as well.
I think it can vary on one level, and with certain people, like yes, it is there. I think it leans more towards people that are also new to the neighborhood, or new to the city, or new to the country, that might be living in that neighborhood. Because the Agnesebuurt is quite a specific neighborhood, it's quite specific community. Even though we were previously in Oudenaarde, which is quite nearby, it's funny to say that then we are new to this neighborhood, but like we are new to this neighborhood because it is still quite actually different. And now most of the people involved are not Dutch, so this has also changed things, of course. So there's different levels of community and how you can define stuff. But and we also relate more to people that are also like people that are not Dutch also kind of maybe are coming to the space more often. But yeah, so it's there, but yeah, it also has its challenges because there's also other communities that are there in this neighborhood that we are also new to, and they also have their own networks that are not all the time overlapping with our networks. But I mean, there's contact for sure. Yeah.
What brings you hope for the future? Would you see a lot of D.H.Z. Werkplaats pop up in the neighborhood?
I think a big part of what makes D.H.Z. interesting is the children. You know, it's, like I said, it's a great privilege to observe, but to also understand the environment that is being shaped as a result of being in this space, and how to cultivate long-lasting relationships that go beyond bike repair and gardening, that can hopefully extend out to building more community events in the summer, bringing people together, specifically through music. I think that dance and music are universal languages that anybody can connect to. And so some of the conversations I had with the kids were like martial arts and the love of like rap as well, and MC and body language as well. Like I may not speak Dutch or Arabic, but I think my mannerisms are very much from the hip hop culture, and the way I dress as well. Streetwear is it's a thing out here, and it also connects me visually to the kind of details that crop up in one's life and how we interact with each other.
So kids and music.
Totally.
What brings you hope?
Oh, what brings me hope, right? That's a good question. I might have to think about that.
All right. I also don't know what I would answer to this actually. Maybe just believe in people and try to prove people wrong when you are an activist, that things are possible, and that even the smallest step you do is kind of a way towards something greater, I guess. But also hope towards what? I don't know. Is it tomorrow we'll abolish capitalism and we all live free? I don't know. That's
study revolutions, and there's always a question of like it becoming a dictatorship. So that's something that I'm constantly aware of, and like my little, rituals or gestures that, as small as they are, they do reverberate within the greater picture. So what gives me hope is that I am still clear-headed, and I'm curious, and that I continue to ask the hard questions, but also softening myself, because it takes a certain grit, I think, to live in this way, but leaning into those soft skills, I think, balances out not just relationships in general, but helps with growth, and that's what I believe in. I believe in change.
If I would shortly say what I'm hopeful for, to kind of contribute something, I'm always consistently like surprised and like amazed by like all of the new knowledges that are coming through the do-it-self space. It's just like, I mean, the turnover of people kind of coming and going from the space can be quite high, but it's like anytime someone is leaving, like 2 more people are coming, and the amount of potential that there is if we can learn from each other or extend those knowledges about how to relate to different things or so on and so forth. I mean, there's so much potential in that. and I feel it like lifting me up quite a lot. That'll be what I say.
Wonderful. Is there any place where people can find you? Do you have, I wouldn't dare saying social media maybe, but do you have a website where maybe the address of the Werkplaats, where people can find you and expand this conversation?
Maybe it's very taboo or anti-whatever culture, but yeah, you find more updates on our social media than our website.
Okay. So yeah, everything is fine.
Yeah, you can find us on Instagram. I think it's still the D.H.Z feeds Werkplaats. And also there is a website to do itself, werkplaats.space. Or mostly come by the space itself. The bike workshop is open every Tuesday, Wednesday in the evenings, 6 to 9 p.m. And is there specific times people should come for gardening?
For the gardening, it's very dependent on the volunteer schedules as well. And we've been kind of like in a December sleeping mode, but the grow season is about to start, and so it's actually nice that this radio situation is happening, because immediately after this we're going to connect with the other volunteers and really talk shop about what the ingredients will be and how that will reflect with the neighborhood at large. And yeah, looking forward.
Exciting. I guess we'll meet you there.
Totally.
Thank you for joining, and I wish you all the best for the future. Hopeful future.
Yeah.
Thank you.